Welcome. This podcast is an exploration into being human and what's possible when there's less attention on the noise in our heads. Warning. While listening to this broadcast, you may experience moments of deep peace, sighs of relief, personal insights, or long stretches of dead air. Do not be afraid. This is normal. Under the Noise with Wyn Morgan and Kate Roberts. Well, welcome. This is our second episode of Under the Noise with me, Wyn Morgan, and my friend and colleague, Kate Roberts.
Hi, I'm Kate Roberts.
Yeah, and I'm Wyn Morgan, if you hadn't guessed. So today, Kate had the idea, because she's the one with all of the amazing ideas. She had the idea of us having a chat about when the noise begins and how it starts. And just before we started recording this today, Kate said, because I think that'd be a really fascinating thing to get into. And I thought we'd get into the fascination of that together as opposed to anything that's been pre-discussed. Because as you might already notice, none of this is scripted. It's just two people having a conversation in real time about what they see and real life inquiries into the way we are as human beings. So Kate, tell me about your fascination for when the noise begins.
It's a good question. I'm not really sure how long this has kind of seemed interesting to me, or maybe as a topic. But it feels like I've been sitting in this question for a bit. You know, the more conversations that I have looking in this direction, and the more things that I hear people talk about when they're having these types of conversations, is that there's a sense that I think, I'm not sure if I've had or if I've heard that other people experience, is that there's almost like a time period where we're born into this life. And there's an automatic separation between kind of where we come from, whatever that is for people, and then how we live our lives. It's almost like there's a division that takes place as we get older. And then the noise, the thoughts get more prevalent than what it feels like when we're young. And that kind of moment to moment presence and wonder and fun that everything is when we're young, that there's somehow this, I don't know, like a branching away from that as we get older. And that always interests me, because while I see what that feels like, because I've been through that, there's also a truth to that we never really branch off, that there is no branching off, that it actually has been with me for my whole life, and it just feels that way. And so it brings me back to, when does that noise begin to make us at least not experience that as much? And when does that start? And it truly doesn't, to me, feel that it's ever really left me. I just got busier in my head, and I love knowing that, because I really feel like I don't know, that feels hopeful. that kind of knowing that it never really went anywhere. And it's the same, concept that you and I have heard, I'm sure, multiple times, that that we're always being guided. And we're always sitting in our well-being, and we're always sitting in our mental health and just don't realize it. And that speaks more true to me than some kind of we're leaving it behind, that feeling. And so, I don't know. So it interests me to see, like to have a discussion about, why the noise begins and when does it begin for us typically. And, as we're humaning, and yeah.
It's a huge question in my mind, that whole thing of who are we before we think of us? So who is Wyn before Wyn thinks of Wyn? Who is Kate before Kate thinks of Kate? Who are we before all of that? And what is it in human beings that make us follow the thought of who we are and then build more thought around the thought, more story on story? And eventually we forget that we made the whole thing up to begin with. From a very early age. My brother has, brother's only a few years older than me, but he has two grandchildren, 2 and almost 4. And in hanging out with them a few months ago, just to notice how free they were in their feelings, that they would be crying one moment, laughing the next, and literally have nothing on it. The fact that they could go from one extreme to the other, because they don't see it as an extreme, they just see it as a flow of emotion. Possibly not even know that there's such a thing as a flow of emotion. They just feel. And while they are different in their personalities, and they can notice that they are sort of forming stories about themselves, about, I like this, I don't like that, and so forth. It's just really interesting to notice that as a part of a human being, we are meaning making machines, right? It's like how it looks to me anyways, that we put meaning on things, and then we live in a world of the meaning that we've made. And I know for me, and I had an amazing conversation with my mother recently about this, about some things I'd made up about me from a very early age that I told nobody else about. So it's 45 years, I think, since I first had this thought, and I said to her that I'd thought this for 40 odd years, 45 years. And she was amazed. I said, really? Yeah. Wow. And she was a little bit, you really thought that? And I said, yeah, I really thought that. When did it disappear? And I said, well, quite recently, probably in the last 5 to 8 years. I'd seen through it, that I'd made it up, but I'd lived my life thinking that was true. It's really funny how we do that. Funny, ha-ha, and funny, peculiar. But it is one of those things, and I've spent a lot of time looking for why we as human beings do that, and it was really, why does Wyn do that, was most of the time, which made me feel worse about it, because I thought there was something wrong with the fact that I had made something up and believed it. I didn't realize that was human beings all the time, and always have and always will, because that's a part of our nature. I didn't realize that we are imaginative and creative by design. It's one of the characteristics of us as a species that we're able to think and able to think that what we think is real and then put that into action. We invent things such as the wheel. We invent shelter. It's a part of what makes us so. We invent myths, and that's what enables us to collaborate so well together in groups. That's one of the defining characteristics that has made us not only survive as a species, but thrive as a species. And apparently, according to research from people an awful lot more clever than me, they've realized that that is what enabled our species of hominids to survive. And other parts of other branches of the hominid species, I'm getting the words wrong, but so someone I'm sure is who understands the whole biology classification of animals probably be laughing at this right now, but you get the point, is that our ability to think and put meaning on thought as if it's real is one of the ways that we've been able to thrive as a species. It's fascinating. And me realizing that took such a weight and burden off the things that I thought were real. So the example of what I'd made up about me at a very young age, that I almost like confessed to my mother that I thought this, and I know I'm full of it. I see the innocence of Wyn in that as one example of a human being living in the noise. But here's the one thing that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Kate, and I love this, is that there is no duality almost in living in the illusion of the noise and thinking it's real, and our real essence. But so the thought I made up, I mentioned earlier on about who am I before I think of me, who is Wyn before Wyn thinks of Wyn. That's still a part of me, as is my ability to think and my ability to create and make up meaning behind things. It's an amazing capacity that we have when it's seen and understood. And me getting a really small glimpse of that has been literally life-changing. So an example that I can, I'm far easier on myself than I used to be. So I might have woken up on other mornings a few years ago and really given myself a hard time for what I said or did the day before. It might take me just minutes for me to get into a funk in my head. Mm. And I might still do that, but at some point I will notice and remember that I am making up, that I'm living in a story as opposed to living in truth. And how I know is, if I feel bad about myself, I've made it up. So I don't know what thoughts you've got about what I've just shared, or anything else that's come to your mind.
Well, and this is, I think, might be its own episode, is that if the thoughts that we have about ourselves actually feel good, but they're still made up, right? But I do think that although we can see that, I think it just gets closer to the truth. And so, made up or not, it's still a little bit closer to the truth of it. And the only other thing that I was thinking that kind of came up as you were talking is, do you think that, okay, let's just say when we're younger and we're still really kind of playful and in that space where we haven't created a bunch of stories. I wonder if there was somebody like a parent or a guardian or somebody that we grow up with that they kind of got this in a way to say, oh, you know what? That's just your mind. Your mind's is a storyteller. And your mind's gonna do that and you're gonna go there with it sometimes. But that's not really who you are. But that's okay. That's what minds do. That's part of being human. You're gonna go there. But that's not really who you are. And if there was somebody in our lives like that, as we start to kind of navigate and build the stories that helped us to create space between the stories and who we are, how that, I mean, we'd never know how that might change things, but I always wonder, like, wouldn't it be cool if I'd have known that that wasn't me? All the stories that I started to build up, and that's not actually the way things are. That's the storyteller, right, of our minds. Like, how would that change our experience of life when we realize, oh, that's the storyteller, and that's what minds are supposed to do? That's how we navigate life, how most people navigate life. I think it's interesting to think, like, would we get as caught up, I wonder? Or would we always realize there's a space between the story of us, the story of the world, the story of everyone around us? How that might kind of change our experience of life. And I have that recently, those discussions with Ava, my daughter, and we were having a talk the other day, and she knows, kids who have tried to hurt themselves, or they cut, or they do something else in order to harm themselves. And I asked her the question the other day. I said, if your friends got that, it's just a thought and that it's temporary and they'll be having one again in a second that's completely different. Like, if they really got that, do you think they'd try to hurt themselves? And I can see kind of the wheels turning. And she's like, no, I don't think they would. So it's an interesting conversation that I think we can start to have even at a younger age. Although when I was her age, I didn't have a clue. I don't think. Not really.
And I'm really grateful to know people who are. That's what they are doing with their life, is educating parents, children, and teachers and caregivers into seeing how thought works, how imagination works, and who we are before we think, who we are during the time that we think, and who we are after that. And also, I think you've hit on something so in my mind, very profound there when you shared about your conversation with your daughter, is that we're all doing things in the hope that it will make us feel good.
Mm.
Always. Now, sometimes it's instant feel good that we want, and sometimes it's the delayed gratification and delayed joy that we do things. But it's always under in that remit of, I want to feel good. And that's why we do things. And it's great to know that feeling good, or any feeling, going back to what you're saying here, is that any feeling is totally transient, left of its own accord. Feelings are free flowing. The way I pointed out with my brother's grandchildren, the 4 and the 2-year-old, is that they are just free flowing expressions of feelings. And I think you're right. How different would the world be, and our species be, and the planet would be, and the future of the planet and our species and everything else that coexists with us, if we all knew that. Feelings come and go, and we don't have to do something in order to feel something. But if I don't know that, it might make sense for me that I will feel better if I take revenge on somebody, as an example, like quite an extreme example. But if people understood that that's not the solution to feeling bad, this would be a very different planet. If my happiness did not depend upon me being, I don't know, wealthy, exceeding my carbon footprint, there's so many different examples we could say about that. And by the way, hey, no perfection here, right? Until the current situation as we're recording this in late 2020, where I used to be on a plane probably 2 to 4 times a month, and not short flights, long flights. And I have not been in the air since February. So definitely no perfection here. But it would be great if we all just realized that feelings don't come from getting things or doing things. They come from within, and they naturally flow. Be really cool to know. And going back to your question about where the noise begins, to me, I've landed on this point that thoughts to human beings look real and feel real. They've got amazing special effects in human beings that make it look like it's not thought, it's the outside world. It's the fact that I'm able to fly that means I feel free. The fact that I'm able to see people face to face in all continents around the world, that means I'm valuable in what I do. And that's the source of me feeling good about myself and feeling the impact of my work. Well, that ain't true. It looks like that. Yeah, and even as I look at my brother's grandchildren, well, sometimes they don't share that toy, and they think that their own happiness depends upon that specific toy. And if their sibling has the toy even for 2 minutes, then that's the source of absolute anger and frustration. Yeah, they haven't learned any different, but they're just the innocent byproduct of how thought works in human beings. I think it's a gorgeous thing to notice.
And that's an interesting example because, it does start that early. That's how it looks. And it can start, going back to the original question, like, where does it begin, all the noise? And maybe it starts in very innocent thoughts like that. Like, I'll have more fun if I have this toy, or, and then just as we learn to navigate our parents, mom seems less grumpy if I A, B, or C, or I can get under mom's skin if I do A, B, or C, or, and it's, life is better. And then we just fill in the blank, and that's innocently where stories begin. It's like we're innocently just kind of picking up these ideas throughout our life, even beginning very early. And when I say innocent, that's exactly what I mean. There's a part of me that when I started to have this conversation and really kind of see it for myself, that what I've created with my mind is the story of who I am around other people. I find myself sometimes getting frustrated that don't get it enough, or I'm not getting it fast enough, or I don't see it in these areas, but I'll see it over here. And but there really is a perfection to it that I miss when I'm there, frustrated. This is how we're perfectly made. Mm.
And perfectly human, as opposed to perfect, never
Mm.
getting things wrong, never falling for the illusion of how human beings work. We're fallible in this life. That's how it looks to me anyway. And that innocence is exactly what you just highlighted there. I think is a gorgeous thing to notice, is that this is so impersonal. It's in our biology as human beings to have noise that doesn't look like noise, that looks like truth, and then live a life as if it is that way. I find that an astonishing capacity that we have, as opposed to a curse. I find that just, wow, look what we can do. I can do frustration out of nothing. It's an amazing trick. I can sit in my office, or I can sit on my sofa and get frustrated, and nothing in my life has changed. It's just, wow, what an amazing thing that we have, a capacity that we have for feelings to arise out of absolutely nothing other than our imagination, and for that to feel like it's real. Wow.
When I just in the past couple of years, when I really started to see this, or even just to look, maybe not even really see. But there's a space. There's a space that begins, and maybe it's, you know, the size of an atom at first, between whatever it is I'm thinking at the moment or caught up in at the moment, or whatever story I've told about any given topic. There's a space between that and the maybe that's not true. That at first seems so small. But I think what I'm coming to see, not only in myself, but also in conversations that I have with other people in this direction, is that there's almost a universe inside that space. It's just the beginning, you know. But it starts in that tiny little space, I think. And if more and more people, I thought, found that space between anything that they were thinking and maybe just the doubt that maybe that's not true, or maybe that's a story, then it really is just seeing a universe and just the beginning of it, of what's possible. That's huge.
Mm. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because that's the reminder to me of what made us think of this podcast called Under the Noise. Is that when we're in the noise, having the suspicion that we're in noise and there's another world which is under the noise.
Yeah.
And that what we talked about in our first podcast, the potential of that space. And I think you're right. For me, I just got a little bit suspicious of the nature of that noise to begin with. And that just started to open up. It was like the thin end of a wedge before I started seeing a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more over months and years, not just instantly. And that's been truly life-changing for me. It really has.
Mm.
So anyone listening and they're wondering, how do I? Well, let that thought just slide for a second and just notice that even if you're just suspicious about how fast your mind is working and how fast you are to want to achieve something or get a feeling or anything that you want out of life, maybe just let that one slide and just notice the suspicion that our desire to want sometimes is the reason that we don't notice what's already there.
Mm.
And always was. Now, in future podcasts, what we're going to invite, we're going to invite people that we know, that Kate and I know, as guests to share what they see about the noise and what's underneath the noise. And also you listening, if you've got any questions or comments or curiosities for Kate and myself, please get in touch. And the details you'll hear in a moment. And also, if you anything that you want to share and even come on as a guest with us, then we'd welcome you to take us up on that opportunity for you to join in on these conversations. And we'd really love that.
Thanks, Wyn.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks for listening, everyone. And we look forward to sharing with you again very soon.
Thanks for joining us. We'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review. If you have a topic or question that you'd like us to chat about, email Wyn or Kate at wyn@winning.co.uk and Kate at katerobertscoaching.com. Until then, enjoy what's possible under the noise.